I'd been living in Portland for about 8 months when I decided to check out the estate sales in my neighborhood. It was a gray Sunday morning, the kind where you can see your breath, but it's not quite cold enough to justify staying inside. The sale was in a brick house on Hawthorne, 3 blocks from where I work. The front yard had tables covered in kitchen equipment, most of it dated but functional. I'm not much of a cook, but I'd been eating takeout every night and figured maybe having proper tools would change that. An older man was sitting in a lawn chair near the porch steps, reading a newspaper folded to the crossword. When I asked about a set of ceramic mixing bowls, he told me they belonged to his sister. She'd passed recently. He named a price that seemed reasonable. I paid cash and carried the bowls home in a canvas bag. They were heavier than they looked, cream-colored with a thin blue stripe around the rim. That evening, I washed them and stacked them in my cabinet. I made pasta for dinner, nothing fancy, just something to use the bowls for their intended purpose. Around 11 that night, someone knocked on my apartment door. 3 deliberate raps. I checked the peephole. It was the man from the sale, standing in the hallway with his hands clasped in front of him. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said when I opened the door partway, "but I need those bowls back. I made a mistake." I told him I'd paid for them. He nodded, said he understood, but repeated that he needed them back. When I asked why, he just looked past me toward my kitchen. "Did you use them yet?" The question felt wrong in a way I couldn't place. I told him I had. He closed his eyes for a moment, then turned and walked down the hallway without another word. I locked the door and went back to washing dishes. The bowls were still stacked where I'd left them. I finished cleaning up and tried not to think about it. 2 days later, I found a folded piece of paper tucked under my car's windshield wiper. It was his handwriting from the receipt he'd written at the sale. "Don't use the largest bowl, please." No explanation. No signature, though I recognized the shaky cursive. I brought the bowls to work the next day and left them in the break room with a note saying they were free to take. By the end of my shift, they were gone. That Friday, I got a call from an unknown number. When I answered, the man's voice was quiet but insistent. "You still have them," he said. I told him I'd given them away. "Where?" I hung up. He called back immediately. I didn't answer. Over the next week, I saw him twice. Once standing outside the coffee shop near my building, looking through the window. Another time across the street from my apartment, hands in his coat pockets, watching my door. I filed a report with the police. They said without a direct threat, there wasn't much they could do, but they'd make a note of it. They suggested I document everything. The call stopped after that. I didn't see him again. But one morning, about 3 weeks after I'd given the bowls away, I found the largest one sitting on my doormat. No note. No explanation. The blue stripe around the rim had a hairline crack I didn't remember from before. I brought it inside, wrapped it in newspaper, and put it in a box in my closet. I told myself I'd deal with it later. That night, I woke to the sound of something scraping against my front door. Not scratching. More like something being dragged across the wood. When I looked through the peephole, the hallway was empty. In the morning, there were faint marks on the door, parallel lines like someone had run their fingernails down it. I moved the box with the bowl to a storage unit across town. Paid for 6 months up front. I haven't been back to check on it. Sometimes I still get calls from that unknown number. I never answer. They don't leave messages. And I stopped going to estate sales. I order what I need online now, even if it costs more. It's easier than wondering whose life you're bringing home. My dad passed in March, and by August I was finally ready to sort through his garage. He'd been a fisherman his whole life, had equipment going back to when I was a kid. Most of it was still good, just sitting there collecting dust. I'm not sentimental about objects. I kept a few things, his favorite rod, a photo of him holding a bass, but the rest I figured someone else could use. I set up in the driveway on a Saturday morning, put prices on everything, made coffee, waited. A guy showed up around 9, mid-20s, ball cap, hands that looked like they'd worked. He spent 10 minutes looking through the tackle boxes, asked informed questions about lure types and line weight. He settled on a green metal tackle box, one of the older ones with the cantilever trays inside. I told him $20. He paid without haggling. Before he left, he asked if my dad had fished Lake Oswego much. I said sometimes, though I wasn't sure why it mattered. He nodded and loaded the box into his trunk. That night, he called. Said he'd found something in the tackle box he thought I should see. When I asked what, he said he'd rather show me in person. He offered to come by. I told him no. Whatever it was, he could keep it or throw it away. The sale was final. He paused, then said, "It's a key, with a number on it." I didn't remember my dad having any keys in his tackle boxes, but it had been a long time since I'd looked through them carefully. I told him to mail it if he wanted. He said he'd drop it off instead, that he didn't trust the post office with something like this. That felt off, but I let it go and said I'd be home the next afternoon. He showed up at 6, knocked twice. When I opened the door, he handed me a small brass key with the number 47 stamped into it. "Storage unit key," he said. "You know which facility?" I didn't. My dad had never mentioned renting storage. The guy asked if he could come in, said he wanted to talk about it. I told him I'd handle it and thanked him for returning it. He didn't move, just stood there looking past me into the house. "Your dad fish alone?" he asked. "Most of the time," I said, which was true. He nodded slowly. "You should check that storage unit." Then he walked back to his car and left. I spent the next 2 days calling storage facilities in the area. On the third try, I found one that recognized the key number. They confirmed my dad had rented a unit there, paid through the end of the year. I drove out the following morning. The facility was small, mostly chain link and concrete. The manager walked me to Unit 47, unlocked it, and left me alone. Inside were plastic bins, neatly stacked. I opened the first one. Fishing gear, reels, lures, line. Nothing unusual. The second bin had more of the same. But underneath the top layer, wrapped in a towel, was a handgun. I didn't touch it. I called the police from the parking lot. They came, took statements, removed the gun. One of the officers asked if my dad had any history they should know about. I said no, and as far as I knew, that was true. They told me they'd follow up if anything came back on the weapon. I haven't heard from them since. But 2 weeks later, the guy who bought the tackle box called again. This time he didn't say hello. "You go to the unit?" I hung up. He called back. I blocked the number. 3 days later, a different number called. Same voice. I need to know what was in there. I told him to stop calling or I'd report him. He laughed, not meanly, just like he found something funny I didn't understand. "Your dad was careful," he said, "but not careful enough." Then he hung up. I changed my number after that. Sold the house 6 months later. I never found out why my dad had a gun in a storage unit or why this stranger cared. Maybe he'd known my dad. Maybe he'd just stumbled into something that wasn't his business. Either way, I stopped answering questions I didn't ask. I teach high school English in Burlington, Vermont. Most of my colleagues use laptops for grading, but I've always preferred writing comments by hand. Takes longer, but students seem to appreciate the effort. Last October, I was walking home from the farmer's market when I saw a yard sale setup on Maple Street. Small house, older gentlemen arranging items on card tables. What caught my attention was a manual typewriter sitting on a TV tray. Royal Quiet Deluxe, probably from the 1950s. Black finish, cream-colored keys. I'd always wanted one for personal writing projects. The man saw me looking and walked over. "Still works," he said. "Ribbon's fresh." I replaced it last month. I asked why he was selling it. He said his daughter thought he should clear out the basement. I tested a few keys. The action was smooth, satisfying. $25 seemed fair. He wrapped the carriage in newspaper and helped me carry it to my apartment, which was only 4 blocks away. Said he didn't mind the walk. When we got to my building, he set it down carefully on my kitchen table. "You write fiction?" he asked. I told him mostly poetry, nothing serious. He nodded, hands in his pockets. "This machine's good for that. Gets the words out honest." After he left, I loaded a sheet of paper and typed a few lines. The sound was exactly what I'd hoped for, mechanical and deliberate. That night, I sat down to write. Started a poem about the change of seasons, nothing profound. But as I typed, the words coming out weren't what I was thinking. The sentences were mine in structure, but the content was different. Darker. I stopped, read what I'd written. It was a description of someone watching a house. Specific details: second floor window, blue curtains, the time of night. I didn't remember thinking any of that. I pulled the paper out, crumpled it, started fresh. Same thing. My hands typed sentences I wasn't composing. This time about a locked basement door and the smell of mildew. I unplugged my desk lamp and went to bed, telling myself I was overtired. The next morning, I looked at what I'd typed. Both pages were still on the table where I'd left them. I smoothed out the crumpled one and read it again. The details were too specific to be random. The house had an address. Local street, 3 miles from where I lived. I drove past it on my way to work. Blue curtains in the second floor window, just like the description. Could have been coincidence. Burlington isn't large. Maybe I'd seen the house before and forgot. That afternoon, I sat down with the typewriter again. This time I tried typing my lesson plans. The keys jammed after the first sentence. When I forced them, different letters appeared than the ones I'd pressed. I stopped and examined the machine. Nothing seemed broken or misaligned. I tried once more. This time the typewriter produced a full paragraph without me touching it. The keys moved on their own, not quickly, but steadily. I watched as it typed. He kept records. Checked the ribbon spool. The keys stopped. I sat there for a full minute before removing the ribbon. I unspooled it carefully, examining the fabric. Typewriter ribbons hold impressions of what's been typed. If you know how to read them, you can see the previous text. I held the ribbon up to my desk lamp. The impressions were faint but readable. Names. Dozens of them. Each followed by a date and a location. Some dates were recent. Within the last 2 years. I took photos of the ribbon with my phone, then called the police non-emergency line. Explained what I'd found. They sent an officer to take a statement. He collected the typewriter and ribbon as evidence. Before he left, I asked if the names meant anything to him. He said he'd forward everything to investigations. 3 days later, a detective called. Asked if I still had the seller's contact information. I didn't. It had been a cash sale, no receipt, and I'd never gotten his name. The detective asked me to describe him. I gave what details I could remember, but they were generic. Older, average height, work jacket. She thanked me and said someone would follow up if needed. 2 weeks passed. I didn't hear anything. Then one evening, I found a business card tucked into my mailbox. No name on it, just a phone number written in pencil on the back. I called it. A woman answered, asked who I was. When I explained about the typewriter, she went quiet. "Did you read what was on the ribbon?" she finally asked. I told her I had. "My brother's name is on there," she said. "He disappeared 4 years ago. Police never found anything." I didn't know what to say. She asked if I still had the ribbon. I told her the police had it. "They won't do anything," she said. "They never do." Then she hung up. I tried calling back. The number was disconnected. That night, I researched the names I'd photographed from the ribbon. Found obituaries, missing person reports, unsolved cases. Not all of them, but enough. The detective called me back a month later. Said they'd looked into the typewriter's history but couldn't trace ownership beyond an estate sale 3 years prior. She asked if anyone had contacted me about it. I mentioned the woman who'd called. The detective said I should let them know if anyone else reached out. I moved apartments in January. Didn't leave a forwarding address with the post office. I don't write poetry anymore. Started keeping my lesson plans digital. Sometimes I think about that man who sold me the typewriter. How he'd helped carry it to my apartment without me asking. How he'd known exactly which street I lived on before I told him. And I think about what he said about the machine getting words out honest. I just don't know whose words he meant. I found the record player at a moving sale in my neighborhood. The couple selling it were relocating to Arizona, trying to offload everything that wouldn't fit in their sedan. It was a vintage turntable with cabinet, built-in speakers. The kind of thing people pay serious money for now, but they wanted $50 just to be done with it. I tested it there in their garage. They had a stack of old records next to it, mostly jazz and classical. I put one on, and it played without skipping. The woman mentioned they'd gotten it from her uncle's estate. She said he'd been particular about his music. I loaded it into my car and brought it home, set it up in my living room near the window, plugged it in, and played a record I'd had since college. It sounded better than I expected. Warm, full. That evening around 8, someone knocked. When I answered, the woman from the sale was standing on my porch. "I'm sorry," she said, "but we can't sell that record player. I need to buy it back." I asked why. She looked at her hands, then at me. "My uncle. There are things on it. Recordings. Personal things." I asked if she meant the records. She shook her head. "The player itself. He recorded over some of the mechanisms. I didn't realize until after you left." I told her I hadn't noticed any recordings. She insisted I return it. Said she'd pay double. Something about the way she asked made me hesitate. I told her I'd think about it. She left her number and walked back to her car. The next day, I examined the turntable more closely. Underneath, near the motor, I found a small tape recorder wired into the system. It was old, the kind that used mini cassettes. There was a tape inside. I pressed play. Static at first, then a man's voice, low and measured. "If you're hearing this, you've made a mistake." The recording cut out after that. Just dead air. I stopped the tape and called the woman. Told her I'd found it. She asked if I'd listened. I said only the first few seconds. "Don't listen to the rest," she said. "Please. I'll come get it tonight." I agreed. But before she arrived, I pressed play again. I don't know why. Curiosity, maybe. Or the feeling that I needed to know what I'd brought into my house. The man's voice continued. "I've left instructions in the cabinet. Follow them exactly. Don't deviate." Another pause. Then, quieter. "They're listening." The tape ended. I opened the cabinet below the turntable. Inside was a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. The instructions were written in cramped handwriting. They described a specific sequence. What time to play the turntable, which records to use, how many rotations before stopping. At the bottom, a single line. "If you don't follow this, they'll know you're not him." I folded the paper and put it back. When the woman arrived, I didn't mention it. She loaded the turntable into her car without a word and handed me $100. As she drove away, I noticed her husband sitting in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead. For a week after, I kept catching myself listening for sounds in my apartment. Not footsteps or doors, but the faint hum of a motor, like something winding down. I've thought about that tape more than I should. About who the uncle was talking to, and whether the woman had followed his instructions before selling it. I don't buy anything secondhand anymore. Not because I think every object is cursed or dangerous, but because some things come with histories you can't see until you've already brought them home.